Hello, this is Korea News with animated commentary. South Korea has been bragging about overtaking Japan in per capita GDP. The anti-Japanese journalists in Japan. Japan will be overtaken by South Korea. But in the end, Korea failed to overtake Japan in 2022. On the contrary, Korea was humiliated to be overtaken by Taiwan in per capita GDP. Korean media reported a per capita gross national income of $32,886, which was surpassed by Taiwan for the first time in 20 years. South Korea's per capita national. South Korea's per capita GNI was $32,886, down 7.4% from the previous year. On the other hand, Taiwan, at $33,565, overtook Korea for the first time in 20 years, the report said. The governor of the Bank of Korea went out of his way to declare that Korea had entered a prolonged period of low growth. Korea's export slump for more than a year, high household debt equals high personal debt. Unstable exchange rate as usual. And the world's lowest birth rate and aging population. Korea's economy has no growth path left. Korea will be poor from now on. The people of Korea must accept the fact that they will be poor. It is as if the Korean people have been asked to accept the fact that they are going to be poor. Until last year, South Korea had been rejoicing at Japan's overtaking it as a finished nation. Korea, which until last year had been so excited about Japan's overtaking. However, it became an oversized boomerang when it was overtaken by Taiwan, a country it had looked down upon. Japan's aging population is currently 4 people supporting 3 people. But 4 people can still support 1 person. In terms of GDP per capita, Japan is at a disadvantage compared to South Korea. On the other hand, with 4 people supporting 3, Japan is not at a disadvantage in terms of GDP per capita. Japan, on the other hand, is the one that is doing well. In the next 30 years, Korea will have an aging society that surpasses Japan's, with 4 people supporting 4 people. Korea will become an aging society that surpasses Japan, with 4 people supporting 4 people. The Korean economy, which is already on the verge of collapse, will not be able to take it. This article was written in October 2022. Just half a year ago. Until then, Korea believed that Japan was in an economic crisis. The global appreciation of the dollar brought an unexpected gift. It's a dream of economic turnaround for Japan and Korea, the IMF said in its World Economic Outlook report released this month. Korea's GDP per capita for this year, 2022, is projected at $33,592. Japan's is projected at $34,358. A difference of just $766. So, the inversion between Japan and Korea seems to be a gift for Korea. How happy were they? The per capita GDP of Japan and Korea last year, 2021, as tabulated by the IMF was $35,004 for Korea. Japan was $39,301 and the difference was $4,297. The gap has narrowed by $3,500 in 1 year. If the yen against the dollar, which is currently close to the 150 yen level, continues to fall. If the yen continues to fall against the US dollar, the per capita gap between Japan and South Korea will be reversed for the first time in history. However, the situation is not good enough to simply enjoy such a reversal drama. Korea cannot be controlled. It is the result of external economic variables. The won has fallen 20% against the dollar this year. Against Japan, it has fallen 30%. The gap between the 2 countries' GDPs in dollar terms has narrowed considerably. It is not so much that Korea has done well. Japan has not done well. Japan has turned its back on change and fallen into stagnation. It was stuck in a deflationary quagmire after the housing collapse of the 1990s and experienced 30 lost years. It experienced 30 years of lost years. The Plaza Accord of 1985 allowed the yen to appreciate artificially. The political tone changed to one of domestic demand. South Korea and China took over the intermediate goods industry in the global market. And China in the global market. The myth of the manufacturing industry, including materials, parts, and equipment, became a euphoria. As a result, Japan has become complacent in the Galapagos Islands, ignoring digital and global trends. The declining birth rate and aging population have also eroded economic vitality. The Nikkei Shimbun reported that the yen was at its lowest level since the bursting of the bubble economy. The Nikkei Shimbun reported that the yen was at its lowest level since the collapse of the bubble economy. The Nikkei pointed out that the yen's fall to its lowest level since the bubble burst was the cumulative result of the Japanese government's hands-off approach to structural economic problems. This contrasts with Taiwan, which has abandoned its past successes in favor of a development strategy. Japan's fundamentals remain credible, but the fact that they are weaker than in the past is undeniable. Japan's fundamentals remain credible, but there is no denying that they are weaker than in the past. In particular, government debt, which has reached 263% of GDP. The government debt is particularly serious. That said, Korea's household debt, which exceeds its GDP, is probably more problematic. So there are still people who consider Japan's national debt to be a debt. Japan's public debt is owed to creditors, most of whom are Japanese. Nowadays, it is just a domestic transaction in which a husband lends money to his wife. That is the mainstream thinking. In fact, Japan is holding back on the depreciation of the yen and maintain ultra-low interest rates because of the huge national debt. Interest rates because of the huge national debt. When interest rates are raised. If interest rates are raised, the value of the assets held by the Bank of Japan, which holds half of the nation's government debt, will fall. The last bastion of finance will collapse. The government's interest burden will also rise. This is what I mean. If we look at the inter-household lending and borrowing that I mentioned earlier, if interest rates go up, if the government issues more bonds, there will be no problem. South Korea has overtaken Japan in some economic indicators, which is a good feeling. But if the Japanese economy shrinks rapidly, Korea has nothing to gain. The economies of Japan and Korea are both competitive and complementary. But also complementary. I'm talking about a lot of interdependence. So, I've made it clear that it feels good to have overtaken Japan. I'm clearly saying that. We also have no problem feeling good about Korea being overtaken by Taiwan. We have no problem feeling good about Korea being overtaken by Taiwan. Every time the Korean economy reaches a critical point, the Korean economy has turned crises into opportunities through structural adjustment and self-innovation. The currency crisis in the late 1990s was an opportunity to change the nature of the economy. Although Korea lagged behind Japan in industrialization, Japan in the area of informatization. After completing these processes, Korea has somehow managed to overcome the economic, military, cultural, and other challenges of past colonial rule. Korea has somehow managed to catch up with Japan, a colonial power in the past, in terms of economy, military, culture, and so on. While it is good to be satisfied with Korea's progress compared to Japan, this is not the time to be complacent. It is time to be wary of Japan's economic rut and consolidate its domestic position. Looking at the global economy as a whole, it will not be easy for the ROK to defend its existing position. In 2021, Korea will again be overtaken by Italy in terms of gross national income per capita. In 2020, Korea overtook Italy, a G7 country, in the Corona disaster. It was only a few years ago that South Korea rejoiced that it had overtaken Italy. It was only a few years ago that Korea overtook Italy, a G7 country, in the Corona disaster of 2020. While South Korea is catching up with Japan in terms of GDP per capita, Taiwan is on track to overtake South Korea before we know it. The IMF estimates Taiwan's per capita income in 2022 will be $35,513, almost $2,000 more than Korea. Taiwan's growth rate is higher than Korea's, and its exchange rate is stable. The IMF estimates Taiwan's growth rate to be 3.3% in 2022, 3.3% in 2022, and 2.8% in 2023. Korea's growth forecast is 2.6% in 2022 and 2.6% in 2022 and 2.6% in 2022 and 2% in 2023. 2% in 2023. This means that, as of June 2023, Korea has dropped to about 1.4%. Looking only at the first quarter of 2023, we managed to avoid a negative number of 0.3%. Taiwan was in the midst of the corona disaster. 3.4% in 2020 and 2021. 6.6% in 2021. South Korea was minus 0.7% or 4.1%. The Taiwan dollar fell only 15 cents in 2022 and 20 cents lower than the won. Taiwan was in the 80s and 90s alone. However, with the rapid growth of the Korean IT industry in the 2000s, Taiwan was overtaken by South Korea in 2003. This situation has changed again after 19 years. Taiwan's growth has been driven by the semiconductor industry, which has developed dramatically. According to a market research firm, Taiwan's share of the global foundry market will reach 66% this year. 66% this year in terms of sales value. Samsung has overtaken Taiwanese companies to take the number one spot in market capitalization and even the number one spot in semiconductor industry sales. Samsung has lost its number one position in the semiconductor industry in terms of market capitalization to a Taiwanese company. Among the world's top 100 semiconductor companies by market capitalization, Korea has only 3 of the world's top 100 semiconductor companies by market capitalization. Taiwan has 10 companies on the list. This means that the development of Korea and Taiwan are almost entirely dependent on semiconductors. Specifically, South Korea relies on Samsung, Taiwan on TSMC, and the performance of these two companies has such a great impact on the country's economy. TSMC is the overwhelming winner in the semiconductor industry. Samsung Electronics is on the losing side. This will affect the GDP of both South Korea and Taiwan in the future. Taiwan, like South Korea, has adopted an export-led economic development strategy. The focus has been different. South Korea promoted large companies, while Taiwan focused on small and medium-sized enterprises. The results were quite different after the 2000s. Taiwan's economy became a subcontracting base for China and lost its ability to survive on its own. Although prices were low and the economy was economically equal, it fell into China's black hole. Businesses, money, and human resources flowed to the mainland. Taiwan's young people even mocked themselves by saying that Taiwan was finished. We must look with envy at South Korea, which has produced world-class companies in electronics, automobiles, steel, petrochemicals, and so on. The Korean conglomerates were not the envy of the Taiwanese people. Korean conglomerates became the object of envy in Taiwan. Out of these dilemmas, Taiwan's gamble to get out of this dilemma was to focus on promoting semiconductors. The Tsai Ing-wen administration, under the banner of technology is the best security, the semiconductor industry. In response to a petition from companies, the government, the number of students enrolled in semiconductor departments at universities and even admit new students twice a year. The growth of semiconductor and IT companies such as TSMC, MediaTek, UMC, and Foxconn is the result of these efforts. Currently, semiconductors account for more than 1/3 of Taiwan's exports. Taiwan has boldly moved away from an industrial structure based on small and medium-sized enterprises and has succeeded in catching up with South Korea. South Korea. As the Hankyoreh newspaper put it, will Taiwan catch up with South Korea by the end of this year? Economic overtaking 3 years early. It will once again lead the four little dragons of Asia. That's what Governor General Tsai Ing-wen said in her speech on Taiwan's National Day. The four little dragons of Asia is a phrase that has not been used much since the early 2000s. Tsai Ing-wen dared to mention them. This is because Taiwan's economy is expected to overtake South Korea's in the near future. Taiwan's economy is expected to overtake South Korea's in the near future. Taiwan's economy is expected to overtake South Korea's in the near future. Taiwan will soon overtake South Korea, she said. Taiwan's population of 23 million is 45% of South Korea's population of 51 million. Taiwan's population of 23 million is about 45% of South Korea's population of 51 million. The main factors in Taiwan's economic growth are the success of the corona measures and the strong performance of the electronics industry, especially semiconductors. From 2015 to 2019, just before the corona, Taiwan's growth rate will be 1% to 3%. In 2020 and 2021, the years of the corona, the electronics sector will account for half of Taiwan's total exports. The economy grew significantly as exports from the electronics sector surged. This is why Korea says the reason it lost out to Taiwan is because of the corona measure and semiconductors. In both cases, Korea would have said they were the best in the world. What happened to the K-quarantine and the world's best semiconductors that Korea says are the best in the world? TSMC, a company that together with Samsung Electronics Company Limited symbolizes the success of Taiwan's electronics-centered economy. With a global share of the foundry sector, which produces system semiconductors on a contract basis, TSMC will surpass Samsung Electronics' market capitalization by 2019. Market capitalization by 2019. Currently, TSMC has a market capitalization of 61 trillion yen, surpassing Samsung Electronics, which has a market capitalization of 46 trillion yen. Together with Saudi Arabian oil company Saudi Aramco, is one of the top 10 companies in the world by market capitalization. One of the two Asian companies. Therefore, Taiwan's reversal of South Korea is due to corona measures, technology disparity among semiconductor companies, and a strong currency. We conclude that both Taiwan and South Korea have semiconductors as their main industry. However, the difference in technological capabilities is very different. TSMC, which represents Taiwan, is a foundry company. TSMC is Taiwan's leading foundry company with a global market share of more than 50%. Samsung Electronics of South Korea is completely outmatched in the foundry industry and focuses mainly on memory. And focuses almost exclusively on memory. And in the midst of the US-China conflict, both companies have been warned by the US to effectively cease production in China. To effectively stop production in China, Samsung Electronics sees itself as a one-sided rival. TSMC, but the gap between the two is widening. For example, Apple, which makes the iPhone, has abandoned Samsung in favor of TSMC. Apple and Samsung are rivals in the smartphone market. It is natural for them to do so. Samsung's own smartphones Galaxy, Samsung is forced to buy semiconductors from TSMC. Semiconductors manufactured by TSMC, its rival, instead of those manufactured by Samsung. The technology gap is said to be widening. Samsung's semiconductors have a very bad reputation. Samsung semiconductors have a very bad reputation for overheating, etc. They are forced to use TSMC semiconductors, which are more expensive. Both countries have semiconductors as their main industry. The technology gap between Samsung and TSMC will determine the growth rate of Korea and Taiwan. And the results are clear. That's it for today's video. Thank you for watching.